The summer sun blazed over Silver Creek, Colorado Territory, in the year 1881, turning the dusty main street into a ribbon of shimmering heat. Sarah Catherine Brennan stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the Silver Creek telegraph office, shading her eyes against the glare as she watched the distant mountains. Those peaks had stood unchanged for millions of years, but everything else in her world was about to transform forever. Sarah was 24 years old. With auburn hair she kept pinned beneath a practical bonnet and green eyes that missed nothing. Her father, Patrick Brennan, had been the telegraph operator in Silver Creek for 8 years, and Sarah had learned the trade at his side. Now, with her father's arthritis making it harder for him to work the key, Sarah had become the fastest telegraph operator in 3 counties. Her fingers could dance across the brass key faster than most men could write, translating the dots and dashes of Morse code into words and back again. She didn't know it yet, but those fingers would soon hold the fate of thousands in their grasp. "Message coming through, Papa," Sarah called over her shoulder as she heard the familiar clicking from inside the office. She hurried back to her station, her long skirt swishing against the floorboards. Her father sat in his wooden chair near the window, his gnarled hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "What's it say, girl?" Sarah's fingers moved automatically, writing as the telegraph clicked out its message. "Urgent stop. Denver and Rio Grande Railroad announces Royal Gorge route stop. Construction begins immediately. Stop. Expect arrival of survey teams. Silver Creek stop." She frowned. "It's from the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. They're sending survey teams here." Patrick Brennan's weathered face grew troubled. "That's William Palmer's railroad. The narrow gauge line." He set down his coffee with a clink. "But I heard tell that the Santa Fe Railroad has been planning a route through these parts too." "The Santa Fe?" Sarah looked up from the message. "But Papa, there's only one good route west through the mountains from here. The Royal Gorge and then on to Leadville and the silver mines." "Exactly." Her father's voice was grim. "And both railroads want it. Sarah, girl, we may be sitting right in the middle of a war." He was right, though neither of them could have imagined just how brutal that war would become. To understand what was about to happen in Silver Creek, you need to know about the great railroad wars of the American West. In the years following the Civil War, the United States was knitting itself together with steel rails. The first transcontinental railroad had been completed in 1869, and now railroad companies raced to connect every corner of the growing nation. Railroads meant money, vast amounts of it. They meant that cattle could be shipped from Texas to Chicago in days instead of months. They meant that silver ore from Colorado's mountains could reach the smelters and then the mints. They meant that farmers could sell their wheat in distant cities, and that immigrants could travel west to start new lives. But laying railroad track cost a fortune. Each mile required thousands of wooden ties, tons of steel rails, armies of workers, and often the blasting of tunnels through solid rock. Railroad companies competed viciously for the best routes, and sometimes that competition turned violent. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, built by William Jackson Palmer, used narrow-gauge track, rails set just 3 feet apart instead of the standard 4 feet 8.5 inches. This made it cheaper to build and better for winding through mountain passes. Palmer's railroad had been steadily expanding across Colorado Territory since 1871. The Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway, usually just called the Santa Fe Railroad, was larger and used standard gauge track. It had been pushing west from Kansas for years, and now both railroads wanted the same prize: access to Leadville, Colorado, where silver mines were producing millions of dollars in or each year. The only practical route to Leadville from the east went through the Royal Gorge, a narrow canyon where the Arkansas River had carved through solid granite, creating walls over 1,000 feet high in some places. The gorge was so narrow that there was barely room for one railroad, let alone 2. Both railroads claimed the rights to build through the Royal Gorge. Both sent survey teams, then construction crews, then armed guards. What followed became known as the Royal Gorge War, and Silver Creek sat right at the eastern entrance to the contested territory. 3 days after that first telegram, Sarah was sorting through messages when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats outside. She looked through the window to see a dozen riders pulling up in a cloud of dust. They wore the rough clothes of railroad workers: canvas pants, heavy boots and sweat-stained shirts, but several had gun belts strapped around their waists. The lead rider dismounted and strode toward the telegraph office. He was a tall man, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled at his collar beneath a battered hat. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in the saddle. He pushed open the door, and Sarah found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Name's James Colton." I'm the chief surveyor for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. I need to send a telegram to our office in Denver. Sarah's professional manner took over. Of course, Mr. Colton. I'll need your message written out. He pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to her. As she read it, her eyes widened. The message described the route through Royal Gorge in detail and ended with, Santa Fe crews spotted. Expect confrontation. Send reinforcements. Is something wrong, ma'am? James Colton's voice was concerned. Sarah realized she'd been staring at the paper for too long. No, sir. I'll send this right away. Her fingers found the telegraph key, but her mind was racing. If both railroads were sending armed men to Royal Gorge, Silver Creek was about to become very dangerous. As she finished sending the message, Colton leaned against the counter. You're mighty fast with that key, miss? Brennan. Sarah Brennan. Well, Miss Brennan, I expect I'll be sending a lot of messages in the coming weeks. It's good to know they'll be in capable hands. He smiled, and despite her worry, Sarah felt her heart skip. Mr. Colton, she said carefully, are you expecting trouble? His smile faded. I'm expecting the Santa Fe Railroad to try to claim land that rightfully belongs to the Denver and Rio Grande. We filed our survey papers first, we have the legal right to build through Royal Gorge. But the Santa Fe has more money and fewer scruples. He straightened up. Don't you worry, Miss Brennan. My men and I will make sure Silver Creek stays safe. After he left, Sarah's father emerged from the back room where he'd been resting. I heard all that, he said quietly. Sarah, when railroad men start talking about their land and wearing guns, ordinary folk need to be careful. He seemed like a gentleman, Papa. So do most men when they're talking to a pretty girl. But you mark my words, before this is over, there'll be blood spilled over those steel rails. Patrick Brennan's prediction came true faster than anyone expected. 2 days later, another group of riders arrived in Silver Creek. But these men came from the east, and they wore the colors of the Santa Fe Railroad. Their leader was a man named Jack Corrigan, and unlike James Colton's easy charm, Corrigan radiated barely contained violence. He was shorter than Colton but powerfully built, with a scarred face and cold gray eyes. He wore 2 pistols on his hips, tied down like a gunfighter's, and the men with him looked more like outlaws than railroad workers. Corrigan slammed into the telegraph office without knocking, making Sarah jump. You the telegraph operator? I am, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. How may I help you? I need to send a message to Topeka. To the Santa Fe main office. He tossed a crumpled paper on the counter. Sarah smoothed it out and read, Denver Rio Grande crews entrenched Royal Gorge East entrance. They have fortified positions and armed guards. Request authorization to remove them by force if necessary. We will not be stopped. Sir, Sarah said carefully, this message suggests you're planning to attack Mr. Colton's survey team. Corrigan leaned across the counter and Sarah smelled whiskey on his breath. I'm not asking for your opinion, girl. Just send the message. Mr. Corrigan, I send a message. Each word was like a hammer blow. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tapped out the telegram. She had sent thousands of messages in her years as an operator, everything from birthday greetings to business contracts, but this felt different. This felt like she was helping to start a war. When she finished, Corrigan threw some coins on the counter, more than the message cost, and turned to leave. At the door he paused. You got a man, girl? Sarah's face flushed with anger. That's none of your concern. He laughed, a harsh sound. Might want to find one soon. Things are going to get rough around here for folks without protection. He looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Real rough. After he left, Sarah sat down heavily in her chair, her legs suddenly weak. Her father came out and put a hand on her shoulder. You all right, daughter? Papa, what are we going to do? Those men are going to kill each other and we're right in the middle of it. We do our job, Patrick said firmly. We send messages. That's what telegraph operators do. We don't take sides and we don't get involved in our customers' business. But they were already involved whether they wanted to be or not. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah sat on the porch of the small house she shared with her father behind the telegraph office. The moon was nearly full, painting Silver Creek in shades of silver and shadow. She could hear piano music drifting from the saloon down the street and the occasional burst of laughter from the men gathered there, railroad workers from both companies, keeping to separate sides of the bar. Beautiful night. Sarah gasped and jumped to her feet, her hand going to her throat. James Colton stood at the edge of the porch, his hat in his hands. Mr. Colton. You scared me half to death. I'm sorry, Miss Brennan. I truly am. I saw you sitting out here and, well, I hoped we might talk. He looked genuinely apologetic. May I? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. I suppose so. But stay on that side of the porch, please. He sat on the steps, a respectful distance away, and looked out at the moonlit street. It's nights like this that remind me why I came west. Back in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, you can't see the stars like this. Too many coal fires, too much smoke. You're a long way from home, Sarah said. This is home now. Has been for 5 years. He turned to look at her. Miss Brennan, Sarah, if I may, I want to apologize for bringing trouble to your town. The Santa Fe brought just as much trouble as you did, Mr. Colton. James, please. And you're right, of course. But I also came west to build something, not to fight. I believe in what Mr. Palmer is trying to do with the Denver and Rio Grande. He wants to connect the mining camps, the small towns, give ordinary people a chance to prosper. The Santa Fe, they're just after money. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And your railroad isn't after money? James laughed. Fair point. But there's a difference between making a profit and crushing everyone in your way to make that profit. The Santa Fe has done some questionable things to get their rights of way. Intimidation, bribing officials, even violence. And your Mr. Corrigan seems quite ready to use violence too, Sarah pointed out. Jack Corrigan is a snake, James said flatly. He's killed men, Miss Brennan. In Kansas, in Indian Territory, in New Mexico. The Santa Fe hires men like him because he gets results and he doesn't care how. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. He came to the office today. To send a telegram. James's expression darkened. What did it say? Sarah shook her head. I can't tell you that. Telegraph operators don't share the contents of messages. It would be like a priest revealing what someone said in confession. I understand. James was quiet for a moment, then said, Did he bother you? He was rude. Threatening even. But nothing more than that. If he ever does more, you tell me. You hear? James's voice was hard. Whatever differences our railroads might have, that's business. A man who threatens a woman is just a coward who needs to be dealt with. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of Silver Creek. Finally, Sarah said, Mr. Colton, James, do you know the story of the lost silver of Silver Creek? Can't say I do. My father told it to me when we first moved here. They say that before the prospectors came, before the miners started digging into these mountains, the Ute people knew about the silver. There was a sacred place, a cave high in the mountains where silver grew like flowers from the rock. The Spanish explorers heard the stories and searched for years but never found it. Sounds like a prospector's dream, James said with a smile. Maybe. But Papa says every legend has a grain of truth in it. When they founded this town 8 years ago, a prospector named Jenkins claimed he'd found the cave. He came into town with raw silver, chunks of it so pure you could bend it with your hands. He said there was enough silver in that cave to make a dozen men rich for life. What happened to him? Sarah's voice dropped. They found him dead 3 days later, shot in the back. His claim papers were missing and no one ever found the cave. Some say it was outlaws who killed him. Others say it was the Ute protecting their sacred place. But the legend remains. Why are you telling me this? Sarah met his eyes in the moonlight. Because men are about to kill each other over the right to ship other men's silver on their railroads. They're so focused on the ore coming out of Leadville that they've forgotten there might be even greater riches closer to hand. Maybe if your people and the Santa Fe people spent their energy looking for the lost silver instead of fighting each other, there'd be enough wealth for everyone. James was quiet for a long moment. You're a wise woman, Sarah Brennan. I'm a practical woman. I see 2 groups of armed men gathering in a small town, and I know how this ends. There'll be shooting, and when there's shooting, innocent people get hurt. I'll do everything I can to prevent that. Will you? Sarah stood up. Then maybe you should talk to Mr. Corrigan instead of preparing to fight him. Maybe you should remember that underneath all this talk of rights of way and railroad charters, you're all just men who came west looking for a better life. She went inside, leaving James sitting on the porch steps, staring up at the stars. The tension in Silver Creek grew like a thunderstorm building on the horizon. More men arrived every day, surveyors, workers, guards, and men who were clearly just hired guns, wearing their pistols with the ease of long practice. The Denver and Rio Grande men gathered at the Silver Creek Hotel, while the Santa Fe crew made their camp on the east side of town. Neither group trusted the other enough to board their men in the same place. Sarah found herself busier than ever, sending and receiving dozens of telegrams each day. Both railroads were communicating constantly with their headquarters, reporting on the other side's movements, requesting supplies, asking for instructions. The telegraph key clicked from dawn until well after dark, and Sarah's fingers grew sore from the constant work. She also found herself in the uncomfortable position of knowing more about the brewing conflict than almost anyone else in town. She knew that the Denver and Rio Grande had filed an injunction in court to stop the Santa Fe from building. She knew that the Santa Fe had bribed a county judge to rule in their favor. She knew that both sides were bringing in more armed men and that violence seemed inevitable. One telegram in particular troubled her. It came through late one night, addressed to Jack Corrigan, and it was coded. But Sarah had been working with telegraphs long enough to recognize certain patterns, and she was good at puzzles. After an hour of work, she managed to decode it. Authorization granted. Remove DRG personnel from Royal Gorge by any means necessary. Board of Directors will support your actions. Sarah stared at the decoded message, her stomach twisting. This was explicit permission to kill James Colton and his men. She knew she should remain neutral, that her job was simply to pass messages along without judgment. But these were people's lives at stake. She made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, as James Colton came to the telegraph office to send his daily report, Sarah slipped him a folded piece of paper. "Don't read it here," she whispered. James looked surprised but pocketed the paper without comment. An hour later he was back and his face was grim. "Sarah, may I speak with you privately?" They stepped into the back room of the telegraph office, where her father was napping in his chair. James kept his voice low. "What you gave me, do you know what this means?" "It means Mr. Corrigan has been given permission to kill you and your men. It also means you could lose your job or worse, for sharing it with me. Why would you take that risk?" Sarah met his eyes. "Because I won't have blood on my hands. Because I won't be the one who helped start a massacre." She paused. "And because I think you're a good man, James Colton, even if you're working for a railroad I'm not supposed to care about." Something passed between them in that moment, something that had nothing to do with railroads or telegrams. James reached out and gently took her hand. "Sarah Brennan, when this is all over, and it will end one way or another, may I call on you properly?" "You may," Sarah whispered. Their moment was shattered by the sound of gunfire from outside. They ran to the front office, where Patrick Brennan was already at the window. "It started," he said grimly. On the street, men were running for cover. More shots rang out, and Sarah saw a Denver and Rio Grande worker fall, clutching his arm. Men from both camps were drawing weapons, and the peaceful morning had suddenly transformed into a battlefield. "Get down!" James shouted, pulling Sarah away from the window. A bullet shattered the glass, showering them with fragments. Outside, the shooting intensified. James drew his own pistol. "I have to get to my men. You'll be killed the moment you step outside." Sarah grabbed his arm. "If I don't, they might all be killed." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw both fear and determination. "Sarah, go," she said. "But you come back, James Colton. You hear me?" He nodded, touched her face briefly, and then he was gone, running low across the street toward the hotel where his men were barricaded. The gunfight that followed would later be called the Silver Creek Shootout, and it lasted only about 15 minutes. But in those 15 minutes, 3 men were killed and 7 more wounded. The town marshal, old Tom Hendricks, tried to intervene and was shot in the leg for his trouble. Windows were shattered, horses stampeded, and women screamed as bullets flew through the walls of houses. Sarah and her father crouched behind the telegraph office's counter, listening to the thunder of gunfire and praying that James was safe. The telegraph key began clicking frantically, messages coming in from Denver, from Topeka, from points all along the line, but Sarah couldn't answer them. All she could do was wait. Finally, the shooting stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, Sarah carefully raised her head to look out the broken window. Men lay in the street, some moving, some still. Smoke drifted from pistols and rifles. And walking slowly toward each other in the middle of the street were James Colton and Jack Corrigan. Sarah's heart hammered as she watched the 2 men face each other. Both had their guns drawn, held low but ready. The surviving men from both camps lined the street, weapons trained on the opposite side, fingers on triggers. One wrong move, one more shot, and the killing would start all over again. "This has got to stop, Corrigan," James's voice rang clear in the stillness. "We just killed 3 men and wounded 7 more over a patch of ground neither of us even owns yet." "Then pull your men back from Royal Gorge," Corrigan snarled. "The Santa Fe has priority. We filed our surveys first." "That's a lie and you know it. We were there 2 weeks before your people. According to you. Our papers say different. They stood there, guns drawn, while the whole town held its breath. Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. She pushed open the door and stepped out onto the boardwalk. "Sarah, no," her father called, but she ignored him. "Stop this," she said loudly. Both men turned to look at her. "Stop it right now. Look around you, look at what you've done." She pointed to where Doc Hargrove was kneeling beside one of the fallen men, trying to stop the bleeding from a bullet wound. "That's Billy Patterson. He's 19 years old, came out from Missouri just 3 months ago. He's probably going to die because you two can't settle your differences like civilized men." "Miss Brennan, this isn't your concern," Corrigan said coldly. "It's everyone's concern. This is our town, our home. We live here. You're just passing through, fighting over property you don't own, killing each other for railroads that wouldn't even notice if you died tomorrow." Sarah's voice shook with anger. "There are laws, there are courts. Let them decide who has the right to build through Royal Gorge." "The courts are corrupt," James said bitterly. "The Santa Fe has bought half the judges in Colorado. And the Rio Grande has bought the other half," Corrigan shot back. The week that followed was one of the strangest in Silver Creek's history. The Denver and Rio Grande men and the Santa Fe crew maintained an uneasy truce, eyeing each other with suspicion whenever they passed on the street but keeping their guns holstered. Both sides sent lawyers and paperwork flying to every court in Colorado Territory, each claiming legal precedent for their right to build through Royal Gorge. Sarah found herself working longer hours than ever, transmitting legal documents and receiving orders from both railroad headquarters. Her father's arthritis was getting worse, leaving her to handle most of the telegraph traffic alone. She barely slept, snatching a few hours here and there between message runs. James came to see her every evening, always at dusk, always careful to avoid any appearance of impropriety. They would sit on the porch and talk, about the railroad situation, about their pasts, about their dreams for the future. Sarah learned that James had studied engineering in Philadelphia before coming west, that he'd nearly died of fever during his first year in Colorado, that he dreamed of someday building a bridge that would last 100 years. "I want to create something permanent," he told her one evening as they watched the sun set behind the mountains. "The railroad is important, but it's just transportation. I want to build something beautiful, something that matters." "The railroad matters," Sarah pointed out. "It connects people. It brings supplies to towns that would otherwise be isolated. It helps the territory grow." "You're defending my railroad?" James smiled. "I'm defending all railroads. Even the Santa Fe, though I wouldn't say that in front of you if I didn't trust you." She paused. "I've been thinking about what you said about the Santa Fe being corrupt. But some of your Rio Grande men aren't exactly saints either." "I know," James admitted. "When companies start fighting over land, they hire whoever can get results. We've got some rough characters on our side too." He was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, when this week is up, things are going to get worse before they get better. If the courts don't give us a clear answer, both sides will go back to fighting. Then don't fight. Walk away." "I can't. I've signed a contract, given my word. And beyond that, I believe we're in the right. We truly did file our surveys first. And Jack Corrigan believes just as strongly that the Santa Fe is in the right. Jack Corrigan believes in money and power, nothing more." Sarah sighed. "Maybe so. But he's got 50 men who'll follow him, and you've got 40 men who'll follow you, and all of them are willing to kill for something that neither side actually owns yet. So what do we do?" "Find another way," Sarah said. "There has to be another way." But as the week drew to a close, it became clear that the courts weren't going to provide a quick answer. The territorial judges were overwhelmed with claims and counterclaims, each side presenting documents that seemed to prove their priority. Some judges ruled for the Rio Grande, others for the Santa Fe, and the legal tangle grew worse by the day. On the 6th day of the truce, Sarah received a telegram that made her blood run cold. It was addressed to Jack Corrigan, marked urgent, and it read, "Courts deadlocked. Cannot resolve in time frame. Take Royal Gorge by force if necessary. Use any methods. Casualties acceptable. Destroy Rio Grande equipment and remove their personnel permanently." The phrase "remove their personnel permanently" was clearly a euphemism for murder. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing. She'd broken protocol once by warning James about the previous authorization. If she did it again and was caught, she would certainly lose her job. She might even be prosecuted for interfering with lawful business communications. But lawful didn't mean the same as right. And this message wasn't authorizing a business action, it was authorizing mass murder. She made a copy of the telegram, then sent the original on to Corrigan as her job required. But that evening when James came to see her, she handed him the copy. "This is it," James said after reading it, his face pale. "This is the authorization for them to wipe us out. What will you do?" "I have to warn my men. We'll need to fortify our positions at Royal Gorge, prepare for an attack." He looked at Sarah. "We'll need weapons, supplies. I'll have to send a telegram to Denver tonight, asking for reinforcements. And then both sides will have more men and more guns and the killing will be even worse," Sarah said quietly. "You think I should just surrender? Let Corrigan murder us in our beds?" "No." Sarah stood up, pacing the porch. "I think you need to be smarter than they are. You said you studied engineering, use that. Find a way to outthink them, not just outfight them." "What do you mean?" An idea was forming in Sarah's mind, wild and desperate but just possibly workable. The Santa Fe wants Royal Gorge because it's the only practical route to Leadville, right? Right. What if it wasn't? What if there was another route, one that only the Rio Grande knew about? James frowned. "There isn't another route. The mountains are too steep everywhere else, the canyon's too deep. Royal Gorge is the only way." "The only known way," Sarah corrected. "But what about the lost silver of Silver Creek? If Jenkins really did find that cave, and if it was high in the mountains like the legend says, then there must be a trail to reach it. A trail that could potentially be widened into a railroad route." "Sarah, that's a legend. A story. Maybe. But my father has lived here for 8 years, and he's heard more versions of that story than anyone. He's talked to Ute traders, old prospectors, mountain men. He's collected bits and pieces of information about where Jenkins might have gone." She grabbed James's arm. "What if we could find that cave? Not for the silver, but for the trail to reach it. Even if we found it, building a new route would take months, maybe years. But if you could prove a viable alternative route exists, the courts might rule differently. The Santa Fe's whole argument is that Royal Gorge is the only way through. If that's not true, their claim gets much weaker." James was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally he said, "It's risky. If we send men into the mountains searching for a legendary cave, those men won't be at Royal Gorge defending our position. Corrigan could attack while we're distracted. Or," Sarah said, "Corrigan could waste time and resources watching you search the mountains while your lawyers use the possibility of an alternative route to stall in court." A slow smile spread across James's face. "You're brilliant, Sarah Brennan. Absolutely brilliant." "I'm practical," Sarah corrected. "And I'm scared. I don't want to see good men die over steel rails and corporate greed." "It's more than that," James said softly. "It's about building the future, about connecting this territory and helping it grow into a state. But you're right that the methods have gotten out of hand." He took her hands in his. "Will you help me? Your father knows more about this area than anyone. If we're going to find that cave, I'll need his knowledge." "I'll talk to him," Sarah promised. "But James, you need to understand, this is a long shot. The cave might not exist. The trail might not be suitable. We might spend a week searching and find nothing. And if we find nothing, we're no worse off than we are now. But if we find something..." His eyes lit up with the excitement of possibility. "If we find something, we might just change the whole situation." Patrick Brennan listened to their plan with a skeptical expression, his gnarled hands wrapped around his evening tea. "You want to go chasing after a prospector's legend while the Santa Fe is planning to attack? Have you both lost your minds?" "Papa, if there's even a chance," Sarah began. "There's always a chance, girl. There's a chance that pink elephants will fly out of my ears, but I wouldn't bet on it." He sighed, looking at James. "Mr. Colton, I admire your optimism, but Jenkins's cave is a fairy tale. Half the prospectors in Colorado have searched these mountains for it. But not with your knowledge," James said respectfully. "Sarah tells me you've been collecting information about Jenkins and his discovery for years. You've talked to people, mapped rumors. Even if the cave doesn't exist, you might know routes through the mountains that others don't." Patrick took a sip of his tea, considering. "I might. There are some trails the Ute used, old hunting paths that wind through valleys most white men don't know about." He set down his cup. "Tell me something, Mr. Colton. Why should I help the Rio Grande over the Santa Fe? Why should I take sides in your railroad war?" "Because," James said carefully, "the Rio Grande is the smaller company. We use narrow gauge track, which is better suited to mountains and cheaper to build. If we lose to the Santa Fe, they'll have a monopoly on rail traffic to the silver mines. They'll charge whatever they want, and the small mining operations will be squeezed out. Only the big companies will survive. And if the Rio Grande wins? We'll charge fair rates because we have to compete. We don't have the Santa Fe's resources, so we need to earn loyalty through good service, not intimidation. James leaned forward. Mr. Brennan, I won't pretend this is all altruism. My company wants to make money. But the way we do it is different from the Santa Fe's way. Patrick looked at his daughter. What do you think, Sarah? I think, Sarah said slowly, that if we do nothing, men will die. Maybe James, maybe dozens of others. If there's even a small chance we can prevent that bloodshed, we have to try. And Papa, you always taught me that telegraph operators serve everyone equally. Well, I'm trying to serve everyone by stopping a war, not by helping one side win it. Patrick was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've got your mother's heart, girl. She never could stand by and watch people suffer either. He looked at James. All right, Mr. Colton. I'll show you what I know. But we do this smart. You can't take a big group, that would alert Corrigan and his men. Just you and maybe 2 others you trust absolutely. And me, Sarah added. Both men immediately said no, in unison. Sarah crossed her arms. Papa, you can't ride with your arthritis. And Mr. Colton, you don't know these mountains. You need someone who can read Papa's maps and directions, someone who knows Morse code in case we need to send signals, and someone who can keep you from doing something foolishly brave and getting killed. That's me. Sarah, it's dangerous, James protested. If Corrigan finds out what we're doing, then it's dangerous for all of us. I'm going. Patrick chuckled. Son, I've been trying to win arguments with my daughter for 24 years. Save your breath. He pulled out a worn leather journal from the drawer of his desk. This is everything I've collected about Jenkins and the lost silver. There are 3 possible locations where the cave might be, based on the stories. The nearest is about a day's ride into the high country. James studied the journal, his engineer's mind already calculating distances and elevations. If we leave tomorrow at dawn, we could reach the first location by afternoon, search it, and maybe make it to the second location before dark. But you'll need to send a telegram first, Sarah pointed out. To your headquarters in Denver, explaining what you're doing. Otherwise, they might think you've abandoned the Royal Gorge position. And that telegram will go through you, James realized. Sarah, if Corrigan intercepts it somehow, or if someone in Denver talks to someone at the Santa Fe, then we'll deal with it. But you need to keep your company informed. Sarah's voice was firm. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you send that telegram. Then we ride. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the wooden boardwalks of Silver Creek. Sarah dressed in her most practical clothes, a split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a jacket that had belonged to her late uncle. She packed supplies into saddlebags, water, food, her father's journal, and a small revolver that Patrick insisted she carry. I don't even know how to shoot this, Sarah protested as her father showed her how to load it. Point it at whatever scares you and pull the trigger. With luck you'll never need to. But I'll sleep better knowing you have it. At the telegraph office, James arrived with 2 men he introduced as Tom Briggs and Henry Walsh. Briggs was a grizzled mountain man who'd worked as a scout for the Rio Grande, and Walsh was a young surveyor with sharp eyes and a steady hand. Both men looked capable and trustworthy. These are good men, James told Sarah quietly. They'll protect you with their lives if necessary. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Sarah replied. She sat at the telegraph key and sent James's carefully worded message to Denver. Investigating alternative route possibility. Maintaining skeleton crew at Royal Gorge. Will report findings within 3 days. Colton. The response came back quickly. Alternative route? Explain. James wrote out his reply. Possible secondary canyon system. Requires immediate survey. Time sensitive due to Santa Fe movements. Trust my judgment. Another pause, then, approved. 3 days only. Keep regular communication schedule. There, Sarah said, standing up. Your company knows where you are. Now let's go find this cave before Corrigan decides to break the truce. They rode out of Silver Creek just as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, for riders heading west into the mountains. Sarah had ridden horses all her life, but she'd never ventured this deep into the high country. The trails grew steeper and narrower, winding between towering pines and aspens whose leaves shimmered gold in the autumn sunlight. Tom Briggs led the way, his experienced eye reading the landscape like a book. These are old Ute trails, he explained. They knew every canyon and valley in these mountains. If there's a lost cave full of silver, the Ute knew about it long before any white prospector stumbled onto it. Do you think they'd have told Jenkins where to find it? Sarah asked. Depends on Jenkins. If he was respectful, if he maybe did them a favor sometime, they might have. The Ute aren't savages whatever some folks claim. They're people, and people respond to kindness with kindness. Briggs spat tobacco juice off to the side. Of course, most prospectors treated the Ute like dirt, so most prospectors died alone in these mountains. They climbed higher, the air growing thinner and colder. By noon, they'd reached a small meadow ringed with aspen trees, and Briggs called a halt. "According to your father's notes, Miss Brennan, the first possible location is up that canyon." He pointed to a narrow cleft in the rock face ahead. The canyon was barely wide enough for the horses, its walls rising sheer on either side. Water trickled down through moss-covered rocks, and the temperature dropped noticeably as they entered the shadows. Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. This was the kind of place where legends were born, where anything seemed possible. There. Henry Walsh pointed ahead, where the canyon opened into a small cave, dark as a mouth in the gray stone. They dismounted and approached cautiously. James lit a lantern and they entered the cave. It extended back about 20 feet, then ended in solid rock. There were signs that someone had been there, old fire pits, some rusted tin cans, but no silver, no indication that this was anything more than a shelter used by hunters or travelers. "First location is a bust," James said, trying not to sound too disappointed. "Two more to check," Sarah reminded him, consulting her father's journal. "The next one is about 4 hours northwest from here." They rode on, and the afternoon wore away as they climbed higher into the mountains. The trees thinned out, replaced by rocky slopes and patches of late-season snow. Sarah's hands grew numb despite her gloves, and her legs ached from the unfamiliar position of riding for so many hours. But she didn't complain. She'd chosen to come on this expedition, and she was determined to see it through. The second location was even more remote than the first, a series of caves in a cliff face that required them to climb on foot, leading their horses up a treacherous trail. Tom Briggs went first, testing each foothold, followed by Sarah, then James and Henry. "If Jenkins came up here with silver, or he was either crazy or desperate," James muttered as he helped Sarah navigate a particularly difficult stretch. "Or both," Sarah replied, concentrating on not looking down at the dizzying drop below. They reached the caves and searched them one by one. Some were small, barely more than hollows in the rock. Others went back deeper, requiring careful exploration with lanterns. In one cave they found what looked like ancient pictographs, drawings of deer and hunters, probably made by the Ute centuries ago. But again no silver. As the sun began to set, painting the peaks in shades of orange and gold, they made camp in a protected spot near the base of the cliffs. Tom Briggs got a fire going, and Sarah helped prepare a simple meal of beans and bacon. The four of them sat around the fire, exhausted and discouraged. "One more location," Sarah said, reading her father's journal by firelight. "But it's the most remote. We'll need to leave at first light if we want to reach it and still have time to search." "And if we don't find anything there?" Henry asked. James poked at the fire with a stick. "Then we head back to Silver Creek and prepare for war. Because the truce ends tomorrow at sunset, and Corrigan's not going to wait." They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally Sarah said, "Tell me something, all of you. Why are you really here? Not just the railroad, I know that's your job. But why did you come west in the first place?" Tom Briggs answered first. "Left Missouri after the war. Too many bad memories. Came out here where a man could start fresh, where your past didn't matter as much as what you could do today." Henry Walsh nodded. "Similar story. I grew up in Boston, but the city felt like it was strangling me. Too many rules, too many expectations. Out here, if you've got skills and you're willing to work, nobody cares what your name is or who your family was." James stared into the fire. "I wanted to build things. Back east, everything's already built. Every bridge, every road, every building, they've been there for 100 years. But out here we're creating something new. Every mile of track we lay is a mile that's never had a railroad before. It's like writing on a blank page instead of in the margins of someone else's book." Sarah smiled. "That's beautiful. And maybe that's why this matters so much to both sides. It's not just about the money or the silver. It's about being part of creating the West." "What about you?" James asked. "Why did you and your father come to Silver Creek?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "My mother died when I was 16. Consumption. Papa couldn't bear to stay in St. Louis, where everything reminded him of her. He got the telegraph operator job here and we came west. I thought I'd hate it, leaving my friends, my school, everything I knew. But I fell in love with these mountains, with the way the sky goes on forever, with the feeling that anything is possible." She looked up at the stars, brilliant and countless in the thin mountain air. Mama used to say that life is short, so we should spend it doing things that matter. I think trying to stop a war matters. It does, James said softly. And Sarah, I want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, whether we find the cave or not, you've already made a difference. You've made me think about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and whether there might be a better way. That's all any of us can do, Sarah replied. Try to make things a little better, try to leave the world a little improved from how we found it. They took turns keeping watch through the night. When it was Sarah's turn, she sat by the fire, her father's journal in her lap, and thought about Jenkins, a man who died 8 years ago but whose legend still echoed through these mountains. Had he really found a cave full of silver? Or had he simply found a little bit of ore and let his imagination do the rest, spinning a tale that grew larger with each retelling? Either way, Sarah thought, his legend might be about to save lives. And that was worth more than all the silver in Colorado. They rode out before dawn, following the last set of directions in Patrick Brennan's journal. This location was the most difficult to reach, a high valley accessible only through a narrow pass that had them riding single file, the horses' hooves echoing off stone walls that rose hundreds of feet on either side. If there was ever a place for an ambush, Tom Briggs muttered, his hand never far from his rifle, this would be it. But they passed through without incident and emerged into a valley that took Sarah's breath away. It was like a hidden world, a bowl-shaped depression surrounded by peaks, with a small lake at its center that reflected the morning sky like a mirror. Wildflowers still bloomed here despite the season, protected from frost by the valley's sheltered position. I've been roaming these mountains for 10 years, Briggs said in wonder, and I never knew this place existed. The Ute call it the Valley of Quiet Waters, Sarah read from her father's journal. It's sacred to them. They believe the spirits of their ancestors rest here. Then let's treat it with respect, James said. We're guests here. According to Patrick's notes, Jenkins had told a bartender in Silver Creek that the Silver Cave was above the valley where the waters sleep, behind the face of the Weeping Stone. They searched the valley's rim, looking for anything that might match that description. It was Henry Walsh who found it. There. He pointed to a section of cliff where water seeped from the rock, creating dark streaks that looked almost like tears running down a face. The Weeping Stone. They climbed toward it, hope mixing with exhaustion. Behind the seeping water, partially hidden by brush, was an opening in the rock. It was narrow enough that they'd almost missed it, but it was there. James lit his lantern and squeezed through the opening. Sarah followed, her heart pounding. The passage opened up after a few feet, becoming a larger cave that extended back into darkness. The lantern light glinted off something on the walls and Sarah gasped. Silver. Not nuggets or deposits, but veins of pure silver running through the rock like frozen lightning. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and Sarah understood why the Ute considered this place sacred. The metal seemed to glow in the lamplight, as if it held captured moonbeams. By God, Tom Briggs whispered. It's real. Jenkins's cave is real. James was already examining the veins, touching the rock, his engineer's mind at work. This is incredible. There's enough silver here too. He stopped himself. Enough to cause another war if the wrong people find out about it. Then we don't tell the wrong people, Sarah said firmly. James, you said yourself, you came here looking for a trail, not for silver. But Sarah, this could be worth millions. And it could get a lot of people killed. Sarah touched his arm. Remember why we came. We were looking for an alternative route to Leadville. Did we pass anything on the way here that could be used as a railroad route? James thought about it, then slowly nodded. That valley we came through, it's narrow but it's passable. A railroad could be built through it. It wouldn't be easy or cheap, but it's possible. And this valley here, it's large enough for a rail station, maybe even a small town eventually. So we found what we came for, Sarah said. A viable alternative to Royal Gorge. You can take this information back to your company and your lawyers. The existence of an alternative route weakens the Santa Fe's claim that Royal Gorge is essential. What about the silver? We tell no one, Tom Briggs said. His weather-beaten face was solemn. Not yet. Miss Brennan is right. If word gets out, every prospector and fortune hunter in Colorado will descend on this place. It belongs to the Ute people. Always has. If anyone's going to mine it, it should be them on their terms. James looked at the silver veins for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. Both of you. He pulled out a notebook and began sketching the cave's location and the route they'd taken to reach it. For now, this remains secret. We report only the alternative railroad route. They explored the cave more thoroughly, and Henry discovered something remarkable. The cave didn't end in solid rock. At the back, Another narrow passage led through the mountain and emerged on the other side, in yet another valley that would make the route to Leadville even more practical. "It's perfect," James said, his voice filled with excitement. "This could be the breakthrough we need. Not just an alternative to Royal Gorge, but possibly a better route." They spent another hour surveying and mapping, then prepared to leave. As they passed back through the Silver Cave, Sarah paused at the entrance and spoke quietly. "Thank you for sharing your secret with us. We won't betray it." She didn't know if the spirits of the valley could hear her, but it felt like the right thing to do. The ride back to Silver Creek was faster than the outward journey, driven by urgency and hope. They pushed hard, riding late into the night, and finally approached the town as dawn was breaking on the third day. But something was wrong. Even from a distance, Sarah could see smoke rising from several buildings. As they rode closer, the sounds of gunfire reached their ears. "They didn't wait," James said grimly. "Corrigan attacked early." They spurred their horses toward town, and the scene that greeted them was chaos. The street was barricaded on both ends, with Rio Grande men firing from the hotel and Santa Fe men shooting from positions near the train depot. Windows were shattered, and Sarah could see bodies lying in the street. "We need to stop this," she shouted over the gunfire. "How?" James shouted back. "They're not going to listen to reason now." But Sarah had an idea. "The telegraph. If we can send messages to both railroad headquarters, tell them about the alternative route, maybe both companies will order a ceasefire." "It's worth a try." James signaled to Briggs and Walsh. "Cover us." The two men began firing at the Santa Fe positions, not to kill but to provide suppression fire. James and Sarah rode hard for the telegraph office, bullets kicking up dust around their horses' hooves. They burst through the door to find Patrick Brennan crouched behind the counter, the telegraph key silent. "Sarah. Thank God." Patrick grabbed his daughter, checking her for injuries. "I thought you might have been caught in the fighting." "No time, Papa. I need to send messages, urgent messages to both railroad headquarters." Sarah rushed to the telegraph key, her fingers flying even before she sat down. She sent to the Denver and Rio Grande first. "Urgent stop, alternative route discovered, stop viable path to Leadville without Royal Gorge, stop engineer Colton has documentation, stop recommend immediate ceasefire pending survey verification, stop." Then, even though it went against every instinct as a Rio Grande partisan, she sent a similar message to the Santa Fe headquarters in Topeka. "Alternative route to Leadville exists, stop Royal Gorge may not be essential, stop current fighting premature, stop recommend legal resolution, stop." The replies came back with agonizing slowness. Minutes ticked by while the gunfight raged outside. Then finally from Denver, "Confirm alternative route details, stop ordering immediate stand-down pending verification, stop." And from Topeka, "Require proof of alternative route, stop ceasefire conditional on verification, stop." "They're agreeing," Sarah said, relief flooding through her. "James, they're both agreeing to stop. Now we just need to convince the men here," James said. He stood up and shouted out the broken window. "Ceasefire. Both headquarters have ordered a ceasefire." The shooting began to taper off, though it didn't stop immediately. James stepped out onto the boardwalk, his hands raised. "I'm James Colton, Chief Surveyor for the Denver and Rio Grande. I have direct orders from our Denver office to stand down. We've discovered an alternative route to Leadville." From across the street, Jack Corrigan emerged from behind a water trough, his face blackened with powder smoke. "You're lying." "I'm not. Miss Brennan just received telegrams from both railroad headquarters. Both companies have ordered a ceasefire pending verification of the alternative route." "Show me the telegrams." Sarah came out holding the message forms. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Right here, Mr. Corrigan. Both companies want to stop the fighting." Corrigan snatched the papers from her hands and read them, his expression darkening. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, might order his men to keep fighting anyway. But finally he lowered his pistol. "All right. Ceasefire. For now." He glared at James. "But if this alternative route of yours doesn't check out, if this is some kind of trick, we're taking Royal Gorge by force." "It's real," James assured him. "We have maps, surveys, everything you need to verify it." The gunfire died away completely, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the moans of the wounded. Sarah looked around at the destruction. Buildings damaged, men injured or dead, the peaceful town torn apart by corporate greed and stubbornness. Doc Hargrove emerged from where he'd been sheltering and immediately began tending to the wounded. Sarah helped where she could, bringing water and bandages, holding the hand of a young Santa Fe worker who'd been shot in the leg and was crying for his mother. As the sun rose higher, both sides began the grim task of counting their casualties. 3 more men had been killed in the fighting and a dozen more were wounded. The destruction was horrific and it all could have been avoided. That evening, as an uneasy peace settled over Silver Creek, James and Sarah sat on the porch of the telegraph office. Both were exhausted, covered in dust and blood that wasn't their own. "We found something miraculous," James said quietly, "and we came back to find this hell. But we stopped it from getting worse," Sarah pointed out. "If we hadn't found that alternative route, the fighting would have continued. More men would have died." "True." James took her hand. "Sarah, what we found in that valley, the silver, it's going to come out eventually. You know that, right? People will search for it and someone will eventually find it. Maybe. But by then, hopefully the railroad situation will be resolved. And maybe, if we're lucky, the Ute people will have been able to secure legal rights to their sacred places." She squeezed his hand. "We did the right thing, James." "I know. It just doesn't feel like a victory when I look at all this destruction." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars come out over the damaged town. Finally, Sarah said, "What happens now?" "Now both companies send their best engineers to survey the alternative route. If they confirm it's viable, and it is, then both railroads will have to work out an agreement. Maybe they'll both build to Leadville, taking different routes. Maybe one will build to Leadville and the other will focus on different territories. But the fighting should be over." "Should be. Corporate wars aren't won in a day, Sarah. There will be more legal battles, more negotiations, probably some more dirty tricks on both sides. But the major fighting, the gunfights and the violence, that should end once both companies realize that neither one has an unbreakable monopoly on the route to Leadville." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm tired, James. Tired of telegraphing messages about legal battles and supply orders and body counts. I became a telegraph operator because I wanted to connect people, to help them communicate. Not to be part of a war." "You've been the most important part of stopping the war," James said softly. "Without you, without your courage and your intelligence and your refusal to stand by and watch people die, none of this would have happened. You're a hero, Sarah Brennan." "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who barely prevented a catastrophe." Sometimes that's what heroism is. The weeks that followed were busy and complicated. Engineers from both the Denver and Rio Grande and the Santa Fe Railroad descended on Silver Creek, demanding to see the alternative route that James had surveyed. Sarah's father's telegraph office worked around the clock, sending and receiving messages as both companies consulted with lawyers, shareholders, and territorial officials. James led several survey expeditions through the new route, carefully documenting elevations, distances, and construction challenges. He was careful never to go near the Valley of Quiet Waters or to mention the Silver Cave. As far as the official records showed, the alternative route simply wound through a series of previously unmapped valleys and passes. The Santa Fe engineers grudgingly admitted that the route was viable, though it would be expensive to build. This admission changed everything. If Royal Gorge wasn't the only route to Leadville, then neither railroad could claim an absolute monopoly. Both sides would have to negotiate. The negotiations took place in Denver with officials from both railroads, territorial representatives, and even federal officials from Washington weighing in. The final agreement, announced 6 weeks after the Silver Creek shootout, was a compromise. The Denver and Rio Grande would get rights to build through Royal Gorge, while the Santa Fe would receive rights to other routes in southern Colorado. Both railroads would pay penalties for the violence they'd instigated, and both agreed to submit any future disputes to arbitration rather than armed conflict. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it ended the immediate crisis. Jack Corrigan left Silver Creek 2 days after the agreement was signed, and Sarah was profoundly grateful never to see him again. She later heard that he'd been let go by the Santa Fe Railroad after the violence in Silver Creek had generated negative publicity for the company. James stayed on as a surveyor for the Rio Grande, working on the Royal Gorge route. He came to Silver Creek whenever he could, and gradually his relationship with Sarah deepened from friendship to something more. One evening in late autumn, nearly 4 months after their adventure in the mountains, James asked Patrick Brennan for permission to court Sarah formally. "You're a good man, James Colton," Patrick said, shaking James's hand. "But you treat my daughter right or you'll answer to me." "I will, sir. I promise." That winter, as snow blanketed the high country and made railroad construction impossible until spring, James and Sarah spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. They read books together, played checkers, and made plans for the future. "I've been thinking," James said one night, about what you said, about building things that matter. I still want to build that bridge, that lasting structure that will stand for 100 years. Where would you build it? I was thinking right here. A bridge across the valley east of town. It would make the railroad route safer and faster, and it would be beautiful, soaring arches, strong and graceful. He looked at her. And I'd dedicate it to you. To Sarah Brennan, the woman who stopped a war. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't stop it alone. No. But you started it. You made the first move, took the first risk. Everything else followed from your courage. They were married the following spring in a simple ceremony at the Silver Creek Church. Tom Briggs and Henry Walsh stood up with James, and Sarah's father walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. After the wedding, they settled in Silver Creek. Sarah continued to work as a telegraph operator, now running the office almost entirely on her own as her father's arthritis worsened. James worked for the Rio Grande during the building season and did engineering consultations during the winter months. True to his word, James designed and built his bridge, a beautiful stone structure spanning the valley east of town. It took 3 years to complete, and when it was finished he had a brass plaque mounted on it that read, "The Sarah Brennan Bridge. Built 1885. Dedicated to courage, wisdom, and the belief that there is always another way." The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad completed its route through Royal Gorge in 1882, and the Railroad War officially ended. But the peace that had been established at such cost in Silver Creek held, and the violence never returned to that level. As for the Valley of Quiet Waters and its cave full of silver, Sarah and James kept their secret. They told only Patrick Brennan the full story, and he recorded it in his journal with instructions that it should remain sealed until both he and Sarah were gone. "The Ute people have been driven from most of their lands," Sarah said when they made this decision. "If they still have some sacred places that white men don't know about, that's how it should stay." James agreed. Some legends should remain legends. Some mysteries should stay mysterious. Years passed. Silver Creek grew from a rough frontier town into a prosperous small city, connected by rail to Denver, Leadville, and the wider world. The telegraph office expanded, adding telephone service and then wireless telegraph. Sarah trained new operators, passing on her skills and her stories to the next generation. She and James had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They grew up hearing stories of the railroad wars and the adventure in the mountains, though Sarah never told them about the Silver Cave. Some secrets, she believed, were too dangerous to share even with family. Patrick Brennan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1895, surrounded by his family. They buried him in the Silver Creek Cemetery with a telegraph key carved on his headstone, along with the words, "He connected the world." James's bridge stood firm through floods, earthquakes, and the passage of time. Trains crossed it daily, carrying passengers and freight, connecting the growing West to the rest of America. And every time Sarah saw it, she remembered that desperate ride into the mountains, the discovery of the sacred valley, and the moment when she'd realized that courage sometimes meant choosing a harder path to avoid an easier but bloodier one. In 1910, when Sarah was 53 years old, a reporter from the Denver Post came to Silver Creek to write a story about the railroad wars for the paper's 30th anniversary commemorative issue. He interviewed Sarah at length, marveling at her role in the events. "Mrs. Colton," the reporter asked, "do you ever regret getting involved? You could have lost your job, your reputation, even your life." Sarah thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No. I did what I thought was right. I couldn't stand by and watch men kill each other over something that could be resolved peacefully. And I was lucky, I had people who supported me, who believed in finding another way." What would you say to young people today who might face similar situations? When powerful interests are in conflict and ordinary people are caught in the middle. I would say that you're never as powerless as you think you are. Even if you're just a telegraph operator or a shop clerk or a farmhand, you have agency. You can make choices. You can speak up. You can look for alternatives that the powerful people might have missed because they're too focused on winning. Sarah smiled. And sometimes, just sometimes, you can change the course of history. The reporter's article appeared 2 weeks later, and it caused quite a stir. People across Colorado who had lived through the railroad wars read it and remembered those turbulent times. Many wrote letters to the paper, sharing their own stories of the era. One letter particularly moved Sarah. It was from a man named John Blackfeather, who identified himself as a Ute elder. He wrote, "I read with great interest the story of Mrs. Sarah Colton and the railroad wars. What your newspaper did not report is that Mrs. Colton and her husband protected one of our people's most sacred places. The Valley of Quiet Waters has remained undisturbed because of their discretion and respect. On behalf of my people, I want to thank them for this gift. In a time when our lands were being stolen and our sacred places desecrated, they showed honor and restraint. This is not forgotten. Sarah kept that letter for the rest of her life, tucked into the pages of her father's old journal. Sarah and James's eldest son, Patrick, named for Sarah's father, became a civil engineer like his father. Their second son, Thomas, became a teacher. Their daughter, Catherine, surprised everyone by becoming a pilot, one of the first female aviators in Colorado. But it was Catherine who, in 1925, discovered the secret of the Silver Cave. She was flying over the high country, practicing navigation and surveying, when her engine coughed and died. She managed to glide down and make an emergency landing in a hidden valley surrounded by peaks. A valley with a lake at its center that reflected the sky like a mirror. When she climbed out of her plane, she knew immediately where she was. Her mother had described this place, though she'd never mentioned its exact location. Catherine explored the valley and found the cave behind the Weeping Stone, just as her mother had described it decades earlier. The silver was still there, gleaming in the darkness. Catherine repaired her plane over the next 2 days, using tools and spare parts she carried. She never touched the silver, never took even a small sample. When she returned home to Silver Creek, she went straight to her mother. Sarah was 72 now, her auburn hair turned gray, but her mind was still sharp. She listened to Catherine's story without interruption, then pulled out Patrick Brennan's sealed journal. "I suppose it's time," Sarah said quietly. "Your grandfather said this should be opened after I was gone, but if you've found the valley, then the secret is already out." They opened the journal together and read Patrick's detailed account of everything he'd learned about Jenkins's cave, including his own suspicions about what had really happened to Jenkins. "I believe," Patrick had written in his distinctive handwriting, "that Jenkins was killed not by outlaws or by the Ute, but by one of his own partners, a man named Sims who disappeared around the same time. Sims probably wanted the silver all for himself. But he never came back to claim it, which means he likely died somewhere in the mountains. The silver has stayed hidden because the people who knew where it was either died or, like my daughter Sarah and her husband, chose to keep the secret." "What do we do now?" Catherine asked her mother. Sarah thought for a long time before answering. "The Ute people have been moved to reservations. Their sacred places have been taken from them. But that valley..." She looked at her daughter. "That valley is still theirs in every way that matters. It should remain theirs." "But Mom, with that much silver we could get rich?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Darling, we're already rich. We have family, friends, a community we love. We have enough to eat and a warm place to sleep. What more do we need?" Most people would say a lot more. Most people are never satisfied no matter how much they have. Your father and I learned a long time ago that some things are more valuable than gold or silver. Honor, integrity, respect for others. Catherine was quiet for a while, then nodded. "You're right. Of course you're right." She paused. "But what if someone else finds it? What if another pilot has engine trouble or a hiker stumbles on it? Then that will be their test," Sarah said. "Their choice. All we can do is make the right choice for ourselves." "I want to make the same choice you did," Catherine said firmly. "The valley stays secret. The silver stays where it is." Sarah hugged her daughter, feeling proud and grateful. The values she and James had tried to instill in their children had taken root. But Catherine had one more question. "Mom, in all these years, didn't you and Dad ever want to go back? To see the valley again?" Sarah smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "Oh, we went back. Just once on our 10th anniversary. Your father wanted to show me something." "What?" "He'd had a stone marker made, a simple granite boulder with an inscription carved into it. He placed it at the entrance to the valley. The inscription read, 'To the Ute people, this place is sacred. Honor it.' He wanted anyone who found the valley to know it wasn't just another piece of wilderness to be exploited." "Is the marker still there?" "I imagine so. Granite lasts a very long time." Catherine made her own pilgrimage to the valley a week later, flying carefully and landing on a flat stretch near the lake. She found her father's marker, weathered but still legible after more than 40 years. She added a small stone cairn beside it, a traditional Ute practice she'd learned about, and spoke a quiet prayer for the spirits of the place. Then she flew home and never spoke of the valley's location to anyone. The story of the railroad wars became a part of Colorado history, taught in schools and written about in history books. But the popular accounts usually focused on the big battles, the famous figures like William Palmer and the Santa Fe executives, the legal maneuvering and the political intrigue. Sarah's role was often overlooked or minimized. History books might mention a telegraph operator who warned of impending violence, or local citizens who helped negotiate a truce, but her name was rarely included. This didn't bother Sarah. She hadn't acted for fame or recognition. She'd acted because it was right. But James made sure that her story was preserved. He wrote a detailed account of everything that had happened, from Sarah's first warning about the Santa Fe's violent intentions to their discovery of the alternative route. He deposited this account with the Colorado Historical Society, with instructions that it should be made public after both he and Sarah had passed away. James died in 1932 at the age of 81. He'd lived to see the automobile replace the horse, the airplane transform travel, and the telegraph give way to radio. He'd built 17 bridges in his lifetime, but the Sarah Brennan Bridge remained his favorite. Sarah lived another 8 years, passing away peacefully in 1940 at the age of 83. She'd seen even more changes: 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the dawn of television. But through it all, she'd remained in Silver Creek, the town she'd helped save from destruction nearly 60 years earlier. After her death, James's account was opened and published. Suddenly, historians and journalists rediscovered the story of Sarah Brennan and the Railroad Wars. Scholars wrote papers about her role as a mediator and peacemaker. Feminist historians pointed to her as an example of women's agency in the supposedly male-dominated Old West. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, by then merged into the larger Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad, issued a posthumous commendation honoring Sarah's service. The town of Silver Creek erected a statue of her in the main square, showing her sitting at a telegraph key, her fingers poised over the brass instrument that had connected her to the wider world. By the 1970s, Silver Creek had changed dramatically. The railroad still ran through town, but it carried mostly freight now. Passenger service had ended years ago. The old telegraph office had been converted into a museum, preserving the original telegraph equipment and displaying artifacts from the Railroad Wars era. Catherine Colton, now in her 70s, served as the volunteer curator of the museum. She gave tours to school groups and tourists, telling them stories of her mother and the dramatic events of 1881. One day in 1975, a visitor came to the museum who looked different from the usual tourists. He was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with long dark hair and traditional Native American jewelry. He introduced himself as Joseph Blackfeather, a great-grandson of the John Blackfeather who had written to Sarah decades earlier. "My great-grandfather told stories about your mother," Joseph said. "About how she and your father protected one of our sacred places during the Railroad Wars. I wanted to come here and pay my respects." Catherine invited him to sit and they talked for hours. Joseph told her about the modern Ute community, about their struggles to preserve their culture and reclaim some of their ancestral lands. Catherine told him about the Valley of Quiet Waters and her own discovery of it 50 years earlier. "The valley is still there," she said. "Still protected. My mother and father never told anyone about the silver, and neither have I." Joseph nodded slowly. "We know. The elders know. We've always known about that place, of course. It's mentioned in our oldest stories. But we're grateful that your family has kept faith with us all these years. It was the right thing to do. Not everyone would see it that way. There are people who would see millions of dollars in silver and think only of profit." Joseph paused. "I want you to know, the Ute Nation has been working with the federal government to reclaim some of our sacred sites. We're hoping that the Valley of Quiet Waters will be one of them. If that happens, the silver will finally be under our protection legally, not just morally." "I hope you succeed," Catherine said sincerely. "There's something else," Joseph said. "Our tribal council would like to honor your family. Your mother, your father, you, all of you who kept faith with us. We'd like to make you and your brothers honorary members of the Ute Nation. It's a rare honor, but the council believes your family has earned it." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. That would mean everything. My mother would have been so proud." The ceremony took place 3 months later, on the reservation in southwestern Colorado. Catherine and her brothers, both now in their 70s, were welcomed into the tribe with traditional ceremonies and given Ute names. Catherine's name translated roughly to "woman who keeps faith." It was one of the proudest moments of her life. In 2015, more than a century after Sarah and James's adventure in the mountains, the U.S. government officially returned the Valley of Quiet Waters to the Ute Nation as part of a larger land claims settlement. The valley was designated as sacred land, closed to mining and commercial development in perpetuity. As part of the transfer ceremony, the Ute Tribal Council decided to publicly acknowledge what had been quietly known for generations: that the valley contained significant silver deposits, but that these deposits would never be mined. "This silver is not ours to take," said the tribal chairman in his speech at the ceremony. "It is part of the earth, part of the sacred balance." Our ancestors understood this. And there were some among the white settlers who understood it too, people like Sarah and James Colton who found the silver and chose to leave it where it was. They showed that it is possible to value something without exploiting it, to respect what is sacred to others even when it might benefit yourself. The revelation of the lost silver's location caused a brief sensation in the media. Geologists estimated that the silver deposits in the Valley of Quiet Waters could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars at current market prices. Some people criticized the decision not to mine it, arguing that the wealth could be used for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. But the Ute Nation was firm. The valley would remain untouched. "Some things," the tribal chairman said, "are worth more than money. This valley connects us to our ancestors, to our traditions, to our understanding of our place in the world. If we sold it for silver, we would be selling our souls." Historians and journalists revisited the story of the railroad wars, and Sarah Brennan's role was finally given the recognition it deserved. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, and the small museum in Silver Creek became a popular tourist destination. The Sarah Brennan Bridge, still standing strong after 130 years, was designated a National Historic Engineering Landmark. Engineers came from around the world to study its construction and marvel at its durability. Today, Silver Creek is a thriving town of about 15,000 people. The railroad still runs through it, now carrying tourists to see the historic Royal Gorge Bridge and the scenic mountain passes. The Telegraph Museum sees thousands of visitors each year, and Sarah's story has become a source of pride for the community. At the Silver Creek High School, students learn about the railroad wars as part of their Colorado history curriculum. They study the economic forces that drove the conflict, the legal battles that resolved it, and the role that ordinary citizens, especially Sarah Brennan, played in preventing greater bloodshed. Some students take the lesson to heart in unexpected ways. In 2019, when a mining company tried to pressure the town council to allow copper mining in the hills above Silver Creek, a group of high school students organized a protest. They cited Sarah Brennan's example, arguing that short-term economic gain wasn't worth long-term environmental damage. "Sarah Brennan didn't let the railroad companies destroy her town for profit," said the student leader at a town hall meeting. "She found another way. We need to find another way too." The students prevailed. The town council rejected the mining proposal and instead worked with environmental groups to designate the hills as a protected watershed. The story of the railroad wars and the woman caught in between has become more than just history. It's become a parable about courage, about standing up to powerful interests, about finding creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems, and about respecting what is sacred even when it's not sacred to you. The Valley of Quiet Waters remains remote and difficult to access. The Ute Nation allows only carefully supervised visits, and even those are rare. The Silver Cave is locked behind a metal gate, and only tribal elders hold the key. But the valley itself is open to the sky, and on clear days, you can still see the lake reflecting the clouds and mountains like a mirror. Wildflowers bloom in summer, and deer come down to drink at the water's edge. Eagles nest in the high cliffs, and their cries echo across the valley. James Colton's granite marker still stands at the valley's entrance, the words worn but still legible: "To the Ute people, this place is sacred. Honor it." Next to it, the tribal council added a second marker in 2016. It reads, "In memory of Sarah Brennan Colton 1857 to 1940, and James Colton 1851 to 1932, who found this place and chose honor over wealth. May their example guide all who come after." The silver remains in the cave undisturbed. Geologists estimate there are several tons of high-grade ore, worth perhaps $300 million at current prices. But it stays where it is, a reminder that some things are more valuable than money. On certain nights, if you sit quietly in the Valley of Quiet Waters, locals say you can hear the echo of telegraph clicks, ... as if Sarah Brennan is still sending messages across time, connecting past and present, reminding us that courage and integrity never go out of style. The railroad wars ended more than a century ago. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and the Santa Fe Railroad both eventually merged into larger companies, becoming part of the vast web of commerce that spans the continent. The routes they fought over so viciously now carry freight trains with automated engines, guided by GPS and computer systems Sarah and James couldn't have imagined. But the lessons of that conflict remain relevant. We still face situations where powerful interests clash, where ordinary people are caught in the middle, where violence seems inevitable. We still need people willing to step forward, to take risks, to look for alternatives that others might miss. We still need people like Sarah Brennan.